In the ancient city of Ur, where the Euphrates River meandered through the fertile lands of Mesopotamia, lived a man named Abram. The city buzzed with life, its mud brick houses and towering ziggurats casting long shadows in the setting sun. Abram, son of Terah, had known this land all his life, its familiar sights, sounds, and smells ingrained in his very being. One evening, as the sky painted itself in hues of amber and purple, Abram heard a voice that would alter the course of history. It was the voice of God, clear and commanding, cutting through the ambient noise of the city. "Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will shew thee." Genesis 12:1 KJV. Abram froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The weight of this divine command settled upon him like a heavy mantle. At 75 years old, comfortable in his life and surroundings, God was asking him to leave everything behind for an unknown destination. But the Lord's promise continued, each word igniting a spark of hope and destiny in Abram's soul. "And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee. And in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed." Genesis 12:2-3 KJV. As the enormity of this covenant sank in, Abram felt a mixture of awe, fear, and excitement course through his veins. This was no ordinary call, but a divine appointment that would reshape not just his life, but the fate of humanity. Without hesitation, Abram began to prepare for the journey. He gathered his wife Sarai, beauty even in her advanced years, and his nephew Lot, a young man with a promise of his own. The news of their impending departure spread through their household like wildfire, causing a flurry of activity and whispered conversation. Servants packed provisions, gathered livestock, and loaded wagons with all their possessions. The air was thick with anticipation and uncertainty. Some questioned Abram's decision, wondering if he had lost his mind in his old age. But Abram stood firm, his faith unwavering in the face of the unknown. As dawn broke, casting long shadows across the city, Abram led his caravan out of Ur. A procession of people, animals, and wagons stretched out behind him, testament to the wealth and status he was leaving behind. Yet Abram's eyes were fixed on the horizon, his faith propelling him forward into the unknown. The gates of Ur creaked open, and as Abram passed through them, he felt a chapter of his life closing behind him. The familiar sights of home faded into the distance, replaced by the vast, uncharted wilderness that lay ahead. With each step, Abram was walking into a future that would change the world, guided only by his faith and the promise of God. Little did Abram know that his obedience would set in motion a chain of events that would impact the world for millennia to come. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, illuminating the path before them, Abram and his family embarked on a journey that would lead them to become the foundation of a great nation and a blessing to all the families of the earth. The caravan wound its way through the ancient lands, leaving the familiar plains of Mesopotamia behind. Abram, now 75 years old, led his people with a quiet determination. His wife Sarai, despite her own fears, stood by his side, her presence a constant source of strength. So Abram departed as the Lord had spoken unto him, and Lot went with him, and Abram was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. Genesis 12:4 KJV. The journey was arduous, testing their resolve with each passing day. They traversed rugged terrain, crossed swollen rivers, and endured the harsh desert sun. Yet Abram's faith never wavered, his eyes fixed on the promise that lay ahead. Finally, they entered the land of Canaan. The air was different here, filled with the scent of cedar and olive trees. As they reached Shechem, near the great trees of Moreh, the Lord appeared to Abram once more. And the Lord appeared unto Abram, and said, Unto thy seed will I give this land, and there builded he an altar unto the Lord who appeared unto him. Genesis 12:7 KJV. Overwhelmed with gratitude, Abram built an altar, first of many he would construct in this new land. It stood as a testament to his faith and a marker of God's promise. The land of promise soon faced a severe test. A famine gripped Canaan, withering crops and threatening their survival. Abram, ever the pragmatist, made a difficult decision. And there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down into Egypt to sojourn there. For the famine was grievous in the land. As they approached Egypt, fear gripped Abram's heart. Sarai's beauty, remarkable even at her age, could pose a danger. In a moment of weakness, he hatched a plan. Say, I pray thee, thou art my sister, that it may be well with me for thy sake, and my soul shall live because of thee. Genesis 12:13 KJV. The plan worked initially. Pharaoh's officials, struck by Sarai's beauty, took her to Pharaoh's palace. Abram was treated well, acquiring wealth in livestock and servants. But God was not pleased with this deception. And the Lord plagued Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. Genesis 12:17 KJV. When Pharaoh discovered the truth, he confronted Abram. Despite his anger, he sent them away with all their possessions. This episode served as a stark reminder that even a man of faith can falter, but God's protection remains steadfast. Returning to Canaan, Abram and Lot faced a new challenge. Their combined wealth in livestock and possessions had grown so vast that the land could no longer support them both. And the land was not able to bear them, that they might dwell together. For their substance was great, so that they could not dwell together. Strife arose between their herdsmen, threatening the peace of their camp. Abram, showing wisdom and generosity, proposed a solution to Lot. Is not the whole land before thee? Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. If thou wilt take the left hand, then I will go to the right, or if thou depart to the right hand, then I will go to the left. Lot, seduced by the well-watered plains of Jordan, chose the fertile land near Sodom, unaware of the moral decay that would soon threaten his family. Abram settled in Canaan, content with what remained. After their separation, God spoke to Abram again, reaffirming his promise. And the Lord said unto Abram, after that Lot was separated from him, Lift up now thine eyes, and look from the place where thou art northward, and southward, and eastward, and westward. For all the land which thou seest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed forever. Genesis 13:14-15. KJV. Reassured by God's words, moved his tent and settled by the oaks of Mamre in Hebron. There he built another altar to the Lord, cementing his faith and gratitude in this new chapter of his journey. The tranquility of Abram's life was suddenly shattered by news of a great conflict. A coalition of 4 kings from the east, led by Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, had waged war against 5 kings of the Jordan Valley, including the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah. And it came to pass in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of nations. Genesis 14:1 KJV. The battle raged fiercely, with the eastern kings emerging victorious. In the aftermath, they plundered Sodom and Gomorrah, taking captives and possessions, including Abram's nephew, Lot. When word reached Abram, he sprang into action. Despite being a man of peace, he recognized the need to rescue his kinsmen. Gathering 318 trained men from his household, Abram pursued the invaders. And when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his trained servants, born in his own house, 318, and pursued them unto Dan. Genesis 14:14 KJV. With strategic brilliance, Abram divided his forces and attacked at night, catching the enemy off guard. His smaller band routed the mighty armies, pursuing them as far as Hobah, north of Damascus. Victorious, Abram recovered all the goods and brought back Lot, along with the other captives and their possessions. As he returned, he was met by 2 significant figures: Bera, king of Sodom, and a mysterious priest king named Melchizedek. Melchizedek, king of Salem and priest of God Most High, brought out bread and wine, blessing Abram. And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth. Genesis 14:19 KJV. In response, Abram gave Melchizedek 1/10 of everything, an act that would later become a precedent for tithing. The king of Sodom, grateful for Abram's intervention, offered him all the goods as a reward. But Abram, demonstrating his integrity and faith in God's provision, refused. And Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted up mine hand unto the Lord, the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth, that I will not take from a thread even to a shoe latchet, and that I will not take anything that is thine, lest thou shouldest say, I have made Abram rich. Genesis 14:22-3 KJV. This chapter reveals Abram not just as a man of faith, but as a skilled military leader and a person of unwavering principle. His refusal of earthly rewards in favor of divine blessing further solidified his reputation as a righteous man. chosen by God for a greater purpose. In the quiet of the night following Abram's victory over the eastern kings, the word of the Lord came to him in a vision. The air was thick with anticipation as God spoke. "Fear not, Abram, I am thy shield and thy exceeding great reward." Genesis 15:1 KJV. Despite these reassuring words, Abram's heart was heavy. He had wealth and fame, but no heir. With vulnerability he voiced his deepest concern to God. And Abram said, "Lord God, what wilt thou give me, seeing I go childless, and the steward of my house is this Eliezer of Damascus?" God's response was both immediate and profound. Leading Abram outside, he directed his gaze to the night sky, ablaze with countless stars. And he brought him forth abroad and said, "Look now toward heaven, and tell the stars, if thou be able to number them." And he said unto him, "So shall thy seed be." Genesis 15:5 KJV. Faced with this extraordinary promise, Abram believed. His faith, unwavering in the face of physical impossibility, was credited to him as righteousness. To seal this covenant, God instructed Abram to prepare a sacrifice. As the sun began to set, a deep sleep fell upon Abram, and with it came a prophetic dream of his descendants' future enslavement and eventual deliverance. When darkness fell, God passed between the pieces of the sacrifice, symbolizing his unbreakable commitment to the covenant. In the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, "Unto thy seed have I given this land, from the river of Egypt unto the great river Euphrates." Genesis 15:18 KJV. This pivotal moment established the foundation of God's relationship with Abram and his descendants, promise that would echo through generations. Years passed, and still Sarai remained childless. The weight of unfulfilled promise hung heavy in their tent. In an act of cultural convention but personal impatience, Sarai proposed a solution. And Sarai said unto Abram, "Behold now, the Lord hath restrained me from bearing. I pray thee, go in unto my maid. It may be that I may obtain children by her." And Abram hearkened to the voice of Sarai. Genesis 16:2 KJV. Hagar, Sarai's Egyptian maidservant, conceived Abram's child. But what seemed like a solution soon bred new problems. Hagar's pride swelled with her belly, and Sarai felt the sting of jealousy and resentment. Unable to bear the tension, Sarai dealt harshly with Hagar, driving her into the wilderness. There, by a spring, the angel of the Lord found Hagar and spoke to her. And he said, "Hagar, Sarai's maid, whence camest thou, and whither wilt thou go?" And she said, "I flee from the face of my mistress Sarai." Genesis 16:8 KJV. The angel instructed Hagar to return and submit to Sarai, but not without a promise of her own. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, "I will multiply thy seed exceedingly, that it shall not be numbered for multitude." Hagar returned, and in due time gave birth to Ishmael. Abram, now 86 years old, believed his heir had finally arrived. But God's plan was far from complete. 13 years passed. Abram, now 99 years old, had settled into life with Ishmael as his heir. But God was not finished with his plan. And when Abram was 90 years old and 9, the Lord appeared to Abram and said unto him, "I am the Almighty God. Walk before me, and be thou perfect." Genesis 17:1 KJV. God reaffirmed his covenant, but with significant changes. First, he changed Abram's name. "Neither shall thy name any more be called Abram, but thy name shall be Abraham, for a father of many nations have I made thee." The name change signified a transformation in Abraham's identity and destiny. No longer was he simply an exalted father, Abram, but now the father of a multitude, Abraham. God also renamed Sarai to Sarah, promising that she would be the mother of nations. Abraham, overcome by the seeming impossibility, laughed within himself. Then Abraham fell upon his face and laughed and said in his heart, "Shall a child be born unto him that is 100 years old? And shall Sarah that is 90 years old bear?" Genesis 17:17 KJV. Despite Abraham's doubts, God insisted that Sarah would bear a son named Isaac, with whom he would establish his covenant. As a sign of this covenant, God instituted circumcision. "This is my covenant which ye shall keep, between me and you and thy seed after thee. Every man-child among you shall be circumcised." Abraham, in an act of immediate obedience, circumcised himself, Ishmael, and all the males in his household that very day. This painful act of faith marked a new chapter in Abraham's journey with God, setting apart his descendants as a people chosen for a divine purpose. These chapters showcase the complex interplay of human frailty and divine faithfulness, as Abraham grapples with God's promises and his own attempts to bring them to fruition. Through it all, God's unwavering commitment to his plan shines through, even as he uses imperfect people to accomplish his perfect will. The heat of the day bore down on the plains of Mamre, where Abraham's tent stood among the great trees. As he sat in the entrance of his tent seeking respite from the scorching sun, Abraham's eyes caught sight of 3 men approaching. And he lifted up his eyes and looked, and lo, 3 men stood by him, and when he saw them, he ran to meet them from the tent door and bowed himself toward the ground. Genesis 18:2, KJV. With characteristic hospitality, Abraham rushed to welcome the visitors, not yet realizing the divine nature of his guests. He offered them water to wash their feet and a place to rest under the tree. Then he hurried to prepare a feast, and Abraham ran unto the herd and fetched a calf tender and good, and gave it unto a young man. And he hasted to dress it. Genesis 18:7, KJV. As the visitors ate, they inquired about Sarah. Then came a startling announcement, and he said, I will certainly return unto thee according to the time of life, and lo, Sarah thy wife shall have a son. Genesis 18:10, KJV. Sarah, listening from inside the tent, laughed silently at the idea. At her advanced age, how could she possibly bear a child? But the Lord, revealing his identity, challenged her disbelief. And the Lord said unto Abraham, Wherefore did Sarah laugh, saying, Shall I of a surety bear a child, which am old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? Genesis 18:13-14, KJV. This encounter not only reaffirmed God's promise of a son, but also demonstrated his personal involvement in Abraham and Sarah's lives. As the visitors prepared to leave, the Lord decided to confide in Abraham about his plans for Sodom and Gomorrah. The city's wickedness had reached a tipping point, and judgment was at hand. Abraham, remembering his nephew Lot, who lived in Sodom, was moved to intercede. Thus began one of the most remarkable dialogues between God and man in the Bible. And Abraham drew near and said, Wilt thou also destroy the righteous with the wicked? Genesis 18:23, KJV. With bold humility, Abraham negotiated with God, asking if he would spare the city for 50 righteous people, then 45, then 40, and so on, until he reached 10. And he said, Oh, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak yet but this once. Peradventure 10 shall be found there. And he said, I will not destroy it for 10's sake. Genesis 18:32, KJV. This exchange reveals Abraham's compassionate heart and his special relationship with God. It also demonstrates God's patience and willingness to listen to the intercession of the righteous. The narrative shifts to Sodom, where Lot sat in the gateway of the city. 2 angels, disguised as men, arrived in the evening. Lot, mirroring his uncle's hospitality, insisted they stay at his house. However, the true nature of Sodom's wickedness soon became apparent. The men of the city surrounded Lot's house, demanding to know the visitors. Lot's desperate attempt to protect his guests by offering his virgin daughters instead reveals the moral corruption that had infected even him. The angels, revealing their true nature, struck the men with blindness and urged Lot to flee with his family. And the men said unto Lot, Hast thou here any besides, son-in-law, and thy sons and thy daughters, and whatsoever thou hast in the city, bring them out of this place, for we will destroy this place. Genesis 19:12-13, KJV. As dawn broke, the angels practically dragged Lot, his wife, and 2 daughters out of the city, warning them not to look back. Then God's judgment fell. Then the Lord rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. In a tragic twist, Lot's wife, unable to resist a final glance at her home, was turned into a pillar of salt. The destruction was complete, but God had remembered Abraham's intercession. And it came to pass, when God destroyed the cities of the plain, that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in the which Lot dwelt. This episode serves as a sobering reminder of God's justice and the consequences of persistent wickedness, while also highlighting his mercy in saving the righteous. Abraham's journey led him to the Negev, where he settled between Kadesh and Shur, eventually staying in Gerar. Here, history seemed to repeat itself as Abraham once again introduced Sarah as his sister, fearing for his life due to her beauty. Abimelech, king of Gerar, took Sarah into his household. However, God intervened swiftly, appearing to Abimelech in a dream. But God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, "Behold, thou art but a dead man for the woman which thou hast taken, for she is a man's wife." Genesis 23, KJV. Abimelech, who had not yet approached Sarah, pleaded his innocence. God acknowledged his integrity, but warned him to return Sarah to Abraham or face dire consequence. The next morning, Abimelech confronted Abraham. Then Abimelech called Abraham and said unto him, "What hast thou done unto us? And what have I offended thee, that thou hast brought on me and on my kingdom a great sin? Thou hast done deeds unto me that ought not to be done." Genesis 29, KJV. Abraham explained his fear and the half-truth about Sarah being his half-sister. Despite the deception, Abimelech treated Abraham generously, giving him livestock, servants, and the freedom to settle in his land. He also gave Abraham 1,000 pieces of silver as a public vindication of Sarah's honor. At Abraham's prayer, God healed Abimelech and the women of his household, who had been unable to bear children due to this incident. The long-awaited promise finally came to fruition. Sarah, at the age of 90, conceived and bore a son to Abraham, who was now 100 years old. And the Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did unto Sarah as he had spoken. Sarah conceived and bare Abraham a son in his old age, at the set time of which God had spoken to him. Genesis 21, 1-2 KJV. Abraham named the child Isaac, meaning laughter, a reminder of both Sarah's initial disbelief and their subsequent joy. On the 8th day, Abraham circumcised Isaac, in obedience to God's covenant. Sarah, overwhelmed with joy, exclaimed, and Sarah said, "God hath made me to laugh, so that all that hear will laugh with me." The birth of Isaac was not just a personal miracle for Abraham and Sarah, but a crucial step in God's plan for his chosen people. As Isaac grew and was weaned, Abraham held a great feast to celebrate. However, the joyous occasion was marred when Sarah saw Ishmael, Hagar's son, mocking Isaac. Her jealousy and concern for her son's inheritance led her to demand that Abraham send Hagar and Ishmael away. Wherefore she said unto Abraham, "Cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, even with Isaac." Genesis 21:10, KJV. This request greatly distressed Abraham, who cared for Ishmael. But God reassured him. And God said unto Abraham, "Let it not be grievous in thy sight because of the lad, and because of thy bondwoman. In all that Sarah hath said unto thee, hearken unto her voice. For in Isaac shall thy seed be called." Early the next morning, Abraham sent Hagar and Ishmael away with some food and water. When their supplies ran out in the desert of Beersheba, Hagar, in despair, left Ishmael under a bush and walked away, unable to watch him die. But God heard the boy's cries and sent an angel to comfort Hagar. And God heard the voice of the lad, and the angel of God called to Hagar out of heaven, and said unto her, "What aileth thee, Hagar? Fear not, for God hath heard the voice of the lad where he is." God then opened Hagar's eyes to see a well of water nearby, saving their lives. He promised to make Ishmael into a great nation, fulfilling the earlier promise to Abraham. This poignant episode illustrates the painful consequences of human attempts to fulfill God's promises, while also demonstrating God's faithfulness, even in difficult circumstances. As Abraham's influence and prosperity grew in the region, caught the attention of Abimelech, the king of Gerar. Recognizing God's favor upon Abraham, Abimelech, accompanied by Phicol, the commander of his forces, approached Abraham to establish a formal treaty. And it came to pass at that time that Abimelech and Phicol, the chief captain of his host, spake unto Abraham, saying, "God is with thee in all that thou doest." Abimelech sought assurance from Abraham, requesting an oath of non-aggression towards him and his descendants. This request demonstrated both respect for Abraham's growing power and a desire for peaceful coexistence. Abraham agreed, but used this opportunity to address a pressing issue, a well that Abimelech's servants had seized. Abimelech, unaware of the situation, immediately agreed to resolve the matter. To commemorate their agreement, Abraham offered 7 ewe lambs to Abimelech, and Abraham set 7 ewe lambs of the flock by themselves. And Abimelech said unto Abraham, "What mean these 7 ewe lambs which thou hast set by themselves?" Abraham explained that these lambs were a witness that he had dug the well. This act sealed their covenant and gave Abraham clear ownership rights to the well. The place was named Beersheba, meaning Well of the Oath or Well of Seven, marking both the treaty and the dispute over the well. Here, Abraham planted a tamarisk tree and called upon the name of the Lord, the everlasting God, further establishing his presence and faith in the land. In one of the most profound and challenging passages of Scripture, God put Abraham's faith to the ultimate test. And it came to pass after these things that God did tempt Abraham and said unto him, Abraham, and he said, Behold, here I am. And he said, Take now thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I will tell thee of. Without hesitation or argument, Abraham rose early the next morning, prepared his donkey, and set out with Isaac and 2 servants towards Moriah. On the 3rd day of their journey, Abraham saw their destination in the distance. Leaving the servants behind, Abraham and Isaac continued alone, with Isaac carrying the wood and Abraham the fire and knife. As they walked, Isaac, noticing the absence of a lamb for the sacrifice, questioned his father, and Isaac spake unto Abraham his father, and said, My father? And he said, Here am I, my son. And he said, Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? Abraham's response revealed both his faith and his anguish. My son, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering. Upon reaching the place God had shown him, Abraham built an altar, arranged the wood, and bound Isaac. Just as he raised the knife, the angel of the Lord called out, halting the sacrifice. And he said, Lay not thine hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him. For now I know that thou fearest God, seeing thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, from me. Abraham then saw a ram caught in a thicket, which he offered as a burnt offering instead of his son. He named the place, The Lord Will Provide. God, pleased with Abraham's obedience, reaffirmed his covenant, that in blessing I will bless thee, and in multiplying I will multiply thy seed as the stars of the heaven, and as the sand which is upon the seashore, and thy seed shall possess the gate of his enemies. This test of faith, while deeply challenging, demonstrated Abraham's ultimate trust in God and set the stage for God's ultimate provision of his own son as a sacrifice for humanity. Sarah lived to the age of 127 years, passing away in Hebron in the land of Canaan. Her death marked a significant moment in Abraham's life and in the fulfillment of God's promises. Abraham mourned deeply for Sarah, but he also faced the practical need of securing a burial place. Though God had promised him the land, Abraham owned no property in Canaan. He approached the Hittites, the local inhabitants, and Abraham stood up from before his dead and spake unto the sons of Heth, saying, I am a stranger and a sojourner with you. Give me a possession of a burying place with you, that I may bury my dead out of my sight. The Hittites, respecting Abraham as a mighty prince, offered him the choice of their sepulchres. However, Abraham had a specific place in mind, the cave of Machpelah, owned by Ephron the Hittite. In a display of Middle Eastern negotiation, Ephron initially offered to give Abraham the field and cave for free. Abraham insisted on paying full price, leading to Ephron naming a sum. My lord, hearken unto me. The land is worth 400 shekels of silver. What is that betwixt me and thee? Bury therefore thy dead. Abraham agreed to the price without bargaining, paying 400 shekels of silver, a considerable sum, for the field and cave. This transaction, witnessed by the Hittites, established Abraham's first legal possession in the Promised Land. The chapter concludes with Abraham burying Sarah in the cave of Machpelah, a site that would become the family tomb for the patriarchs and their wives. This account not only shows Abraham's deep love for Sarah, but also his commitment to establishing a permanent presence in the land God had promised, even in the face of personal loss. Abraham, now advanced in years, turned his attention to securing a wife for his son Isaac. Determined to avoid intermarriage with the Canaanites, he summoned his most trusted servant and gave him a solemn charge. And I will make thee swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of the earth, that thou shalt not take a wife unto my son of the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I dwell. But thou shalt go unto my country and to my kindred, and take a wife unto my son Isaac. The servant, concerned about the possibility of failure, asked what he should do if the woman refused to come. Abraham assured him that God would send his angel before him, But if the woman was unwilling, the servant would be released from his oath. With this charge, the servant set out for Mesopotamia, to the city of Nahor. Arriving at a well outside the city, he prayed for God's guidance. And he said, O Lord God of my master Abraham, I pray thee, send me good speed this day, and shew kindness unto my master Abraham. He asked for a sign. The young woman who offered to draw water for him and his camels would be the one God had chosen for Isaac. Before he had finished praying, Rebekah, Abraham's great niece, appeared at the well. She not only gave the servant a drink, but also offered to water his camels, fulfilling the exact sign he had requested. Overjoyed at God's clear answer, the servant gave Rebekah gold jewelry and asked about her family. Learning she was indeed from Abraham's relatives, he bowed in worship, and the man bowed down his head and worshipped the Lord. And he said, Blessed be the Lord God of my master Abraham, who hath not left destitute my master of his mercy and his truth. I being in the way, the Lord led me to the house of my master's brethren. Rebekah ran home to tell her family, and her brother Laban invited the servant to stay. The servant recounted the entire story to Rebekah's family, concluding with a request for Rebekah's hand in marriage for Isaac. Her family, recognizing God's hand in the matter, agreed. The next morning, when asked if she would go, Rebekah consented. And they called Rebekah and said unto her, Wilt thou go with this man? And she said, I will go. The party set out for Canaan. As they neared Abraham's home, Isaac was in the field meditating. He looked up to see the approaching caravan. Rebekah, upon learning that the man in the distance was Isaac, covered herself with a veil according to custom. The servant related all that had transpired to Isaac, who then took Rebekah as his wife. And Isaac brought her into his mother Sarah's tent, and took Rebekah, and she became his wife. And he loved her, and Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. This detailed account not only shows God's providential care in fulfilling his promises to Abraham, but also provides a beautiful picture of faith, obedience, and divine guidance in the formation of a godly marriage. In his later years, Abraham took another wife named Keturah, who bore him 6 more sons. However, Isaac remained his primary heir. And Abraham gave all that he had unto Isaac. But unto the sons of the concubines which Abraham had, Abraham gave gifts, and sent them away from Isaac his son, while he yet lived eastward unto the east country. Abraham lived to the ripe old age of 175 years. The Bible describes his passing with dignity and fullness. Then Abraham gave up the ghost, and died in a good old age, an old man, and full of years, and was gathered to his people. His sons Isaac and Ishmael came together to bury him in the cave of Machpelah, alongside Sarah. This joint act of the 2 brothers, often at odds, shows a moment of unity in honoring their father. After Abraham's death, God's blessing rested on Isaac, who settled near Beer Lahai Roi in the Negev. This chapter brings closure to the remarkable life of Abraham, the father of faith. His journey from Ur to the Promised Land, his unwavering trust in God's promises despite seemingly impossible odds, and his role as the patriarch of God's chosen people, left an indelible mark on human history and the unfolding of God's redemptive plan.